Here we are, the final chapter of Zelda Side Assault. At least for the main console games, that is. You should by now know what exactals this series is about. Admittedly, the other episodes were more rundowns of my experiences with Zelda, whereas this one, I suppose it's a little more of a review, but still sporting some of those biased opinions and should be taken with, well, you know. We've covered all the main lines, and now, months after its release, it's time to talk about a game that was showered with an insane amount of perfect scores. So surely the game's gotta be perfect, right? No. I mean, first of all, game journalists are hacks, but that's a whole nother thing. And I don't honestly believe any game with DLC you need to buy in order to experience the whole story can be considered perfect, but that's a whole nother thing. The point is, the game has flaws. It's not immune to them, just like previous Zeldas. Now, before you spill your chalky milk or choke on your tendies, I'll start off by telling you I do really enjoy Breath of the Wild. We're gonna tackle the bad and acknowledge the good along the way, and sum it up with some more good. The easiest way to do this is using the handy dandy list I have here on the big old issues of Breath of the Wild, in parentheses, and also any future Zelda game utilizing a similar engine, or maybe even the DLC if we ever find anything out about it. So let's see the areas of issue. Now, these seem like a lot and big things to be issues, but them being listed doesn't mean they're entirely bad. The easiest example is, of course, so, this game was announced way back in 2013, and the main teaser we got of it was back when it was a Wii U exclusive 3 years ago. As time marched onwards, we only got snippets about once a year as it was delayed repeatedly. Finally, years later, we started to get images and trailers getting to see more of what this world was, and the overarching story. The first actual trailer showed off so much, and it was stunning. The thing that captivated me the most was the appearance of Calamity Ganon. The concept seemed so mystifying, so powerful. The gameplay footage and whatnot suggest a collapsed timeline, and fans started speculating wildly, and holy wow was it fun. When the loading image was leaked and showed a figure face to face with the Calamity with what appeared to be red hair, I first thought to myself, oh wow, could this be a story about Ganondorf trying to separate himself from the entity of Demise's curse? I mean, Link's gauntlets had Gerudo designs on them. That was my main hope, some bleak timeline with them trying to combat their destiny. When I got the actual game, I was always ready for some insanely amazing moment, but it never came. Despite trying to break away from generic Zeldas, it was the most half-assed done-to-death plot of them all. Zelda's trapped because Ganon, and Link has to save her. The story was poorly told and executed. It had a ton of wasted potential. The Shrine of Resurrection was a pretty unique way to start the game, and then it was just done and gone, and no one really cared about it. Nothing was really done with it outside of a cutscene later being like, Link's have to go bring him to the start of the game to tie this shoes nasty up. Zelda was a delight in the memories, showing off a fun personality. I mean, look at that. Look at that cute little scoot. And look at that big old boot. It was fun seeing her interact with Link, each memory basically being a different emotion she'd convey. A lot of people didn't like her, but I don't know. I thought having Zelda as a failure of the legend was a nice take on it. Every other Zelda has the whole, welp, I'm Zelda, it's time to just win with magic powers, and it was nice to see that she didn't. It was nice to see her struggle. It was nice to see, oh wait, no, oops, she did exactly that. Her ending had no impact. She was fighting Ganon for 100 years, but she isn't older, she doesn't really appear hurt, and if anything, she's stronger now. The other fun story aspect of the game were the champions. Instead of Link being the solo hero, he was basically just a hired sword to help Zelda on her quest. With their ethnically diverse ragtag group of sexy fish and Amazons, and Falco from Star Fox, who everyone hates. Every memory was just a delight to view, but it left a bad taste in your mouth afterward because as soon as you finished it, you're just like, why are we not at this part? Why are we in this empty, dumb place where everyone's dead? How cool would it have been if you started as Zelda's hired sword and the game builds up to Ganon's takeover, at which point you see each of the champions die as you try and tame their beasts. Instead, their friendships and relations with Link form off-screen, which is so sad because the small glimpses you get warm your heart. Maybe even end the game with Link losing. I mean, nowadays with DLC running rampant, it make perfect sense to end it like that and have the DLC revive Link to beat Ganon. But I also believe that games should be able to have more sad endings. Kid, just grow up. Life isn't happy. Basically, the 100-year gap was unnecessary and muddied up the story. That being said, it is very unique and refreshing that the story is mostly optional. If you don't want to experience it, good. You don't have to. The most you need to hear is the king be like, look man, I'm dead and I'd kind of like my diggity daughter to, you know, not be. So get on that, baby cakes. And then be on your way. And alongside your way, you get into Oh wait, no you don't. Okay, so this is debated a fair amount. A lot of people with open world games do enjoy ambient music, but Zelda has always been a game with a large focus on music, either having howling, jamming out on instruments, or even dancing. It was a shame to go into this game and have the best part of the soundtrack be essentially a remix of a previously existing theme. Hyrule Castle is one of the few soundtracks you get to listen to outside of some piano flourishes and some college grad interpretive dance and bongo experience for fighting peeps. True, the ambient music could produce some scenes of beauty, like watching the dragons in the distance as a hauntingly beautiful tune plays as you stare. But actual songs do that too. Like yeah, piano dragons are nice, but even to this day, I still get choked up when I watch the Macau scene in Majora's Mask because of how beautiful the Song of Healing is, which too is mostly piano, but it has a melody rather than sounding like someone is just kind of feeling the room with a keyboard in front of them. The few themes they do have just aren't memorable. I can't hum much of the Breath of the Wild boss theme, but you know I'm always jamming out to that. It really was a letdown that the main takeaway songs from this title were just revisits to previous themes. The main theme was nice, which kind of makes me wish there was an Ocarina of Time-esque title screen with that floating along instead of a silent, hey check it out, I learned how to use PowerPoint. It gets me mad instead of glad, so much so that I want to hit something, but in order to do that we need to get into So I do actually enjoy the freedom you have with fighting enemies in this game. Having the bow as a secondary weapon was super needed, and I'm a sucker for bow combat, which I loved in this game. The bigger focus on stealth made things a lot more fun too. Distracting enemies and sneaking up on them to hopefully one-shot them took away the staleness of melee combat. A lot of people complain about the durability, and sure, it's not ideal, but here's the thing, if it wasn't in the game, the combat would have been way worse. Honestly, I kinda like having flimsy weapons mid-battle and just kinda swapping on the go real quick, but I can see why that can be a damper when you actually have like good weapons. The main issue I have with the combat mostly stems from the primary weapons. There are essentially three types of weapons: jabbers, sword, and big sword, with a couple of joke weapons in between. But none of them really have pizzazz. You either attack normal, jump attack, or charge attack, with the option to throw your weapon. There are no directional input attacks, just one standard combo for each type. There are no unique weapons in the game, they are all just a reskin of one of the three types. As you progress too, there becomes a lot less incentive to actually fight anything, as you'll be breaking your weapons for worse weapons. This Zelda also suffers from a severe lack of a threat when you can just pause and fully heal using items, which is probably why most things can one-shot you early on. One of the big things is the flurry rush, which I'm sorry, it's just dumb. Like, maybe if there was no slow-mo, but even then it just looks awkward. Link just magnets himself towards the target and starts this weird attack animation. Counters and parries are fine, but you don't need to have these, oh, I can't believe I got countered. Huh? Oh, right, yeah. Ah! Every time I did one, I just imagined Nintendo employees clapping for me and congratulating me using baby talk. It felt weird. I think if the window was shortened and you could only do it if you dodged close to an enemy, it would be passable, but as it stands, blech. But luckily there are plenty of other ways to actually fight. The thing I've seen almost everyone talk about is enemy variety. There are roughly 15 enemy types in the game, and you really only see 3 of them, those of course being the Bokobbles, Moobles, and Lizard. Hell, this game has less variety than the NES Zelda. That is not okay. Why is Nintendo getting increasingly less creative with enemies and NPCs? All Mario RPG characters are now red toads, all Zelda enemies are Bokobbles. Are they saving all their creativity points for Odyssey? Plus the worst part is you basically see them all in the first few hours of the game, so there's hardly any surprises. And I'm sorry, but how do you not have any Dark Nuts in this game? It would have been so perfect if when you finally go to Hyrule Castle, you were introduced to a new enemy. And since Dark Nuts have always been heavily combat focused, how neat would it have been if they could counter and flurry rush you? But nope, Bokobble, 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 Lizard, Mooble, that's it. Most of them aren't even that great to fight. It's funny to see a Moblin pick up a Bokoblin for the first time, but other than that, the only enemy I consistently enjoy fighting is the Lionel Huts. They're fast, they're mean, they hit like a truck, and they can have various weapon types and sport more moves outside of, here comes the attack! There are a few mini-boss monsters you can fight, which are pretty fun. I think the game honestly could have been better with more mini-boss types and less of the 3 camp dwellers. It would have made going into camp seem a bit more worth it, since as is, it's basically just wail on 3 to 6 of an enemy and get a shitty chest. There should have been more to find and fight on. Now when I say this, I'm not saying the map is bad. The biomes and environments they have are pretty great, but there's just nothing in them. Exploring is gonna net you one of two things, either a shrine or a Korok seed, which is literal poopy. The only part of the game I thought was built tremendously was the plateau, which, living up to the name, it's the height of gameplay. But unfortunately, it's right in the beginning of the game. You get 4 unique shrines, the run-ins with the enemy types, a mini-boss, and familiarity with the environments. It was the perfect area to practice your new moves. Plus, you didn't have to go too far to find something else of interest. But when you actually get off the plateau, it's more or less the same with a bunch of space in between everything. Not good space, just empty space. Like I said, there are enemy camps, but fighting them becomes redundant and useless the further you progress. There are little puzzles for the Koroks, but those too are recycled, so after you figured out like the 7 different types, it becomes more of a chore. Same goes with the shrines. There are some unique ones that are basically just what the puzzles would have been in an actual Zelda dungeon, which is fun, but there are plenty that are just here take an item or here fight the same again, with a few bigger areas being devoted to them, which are probably the highlights of shrines. At first, exploring was insanely rewarding, but 5 hours in, you always know what you're gonna find. Not to mention, there are like 0 caves. Maybe 1 or 2 entrances to a shrine, but there is no spelunking to be had here, which is a shame. Zelda was always pretty heavy on secret bombable walls leading into caves, and with how huge these mountains are, it'd be amazing to explore underground labyrinths. The torch barely has a use as it is. With this game though, you sometimes have those bombable walls with a shrine behind it, and that's it. I will give it credit for the methods of travel. People can travel by either just sailing along with the paraglider, rocking that horseback adventure, or quick traveling to previously found locations. But you do have more creative methods as well. Shield surfing down mountains was fun on the bun, and with the stasis ability, you can launch yourself through the air to cover great distances in short amounts of time. The volcanic area was probably the most fun. No other area really had their own thing outside of cross-dressing and sandstorms, and the former became a chore after the initial exhale out of your nose from the cutscene. The towns didn't do much to impress. Most of them felt pretty bland and unmemorable. Like, I honestly can't remember any town names in this game. The build-ups to the Divine Beasts were hit and miss. Zora's and Gerudo's were great, but the other two, you know. Afterwards, all it leads to is... This area is weird for me, a big old good and bad. For starters, all of the dungeons and shrines have the same motif, and that is gross. The closest thing you get to a difference in any dungeon is dark, for the one in the volcano for the first part. Dungeons should stand out more so they can be more memorable. They could have changed some textures or added on some decals, something to make them pop. Hell, even in Zelda 1, you at the very least had different colored walls. You couldn't have even done that? Just sames? These also aren't traditional dungeons. There are no walking through doors to have it close behind you and a mini-boss jump out. There are just puzzles. It is unique and a bit refreshing. I actually do enjoy the Divine Beasts a good amount, but they are just so short. And each one's shtick is rotate. That's the theme, just rotate to puzzle solve. If they were twice as long and maybe had a bit more variety and maybe some more enemies sprinkled in there, it could have been a lot better. The easiest comparison I can make is to Majora's Mask. Both games have 4 dungeons, each tied to a race that all focus around one big central puzzle. The ones in Majora's just wound up being larger and more complex, with the puzzles having more variety. Oh, there's fire. I guess I'll rotate this one click at a time until it's fixed. The stray fairies furthered exploration and provided more challenge to get through the dungeon if you desired. But in Breath of the Wild, the most you get is a chest that houses a very mediocre weapon or something. As said, the Divine Beasts weren't bad. They just looked stale and didn't really provide much challenge. I think they could have added a secondary shtick to each dungeon. Maybe in the volcano one, we could have had like a one-hit killer stalking you in the darkness and dousing any flames you light as you try and solve more light-based puzzles. Or have the Sky Beast have a few paraglider things like dropping bombs into pipes to progress somehow. Plus, at the end of each dungeon, you fight a boss, but this time they all share the same theme, making them, well, less special. Again, it wasn't, oh dang, can't wait to see what fearsome creature this boss is gonna be. It was, oh dang, I wonder how stupid this blight will look. One dungeon that was fantastic was the final one. Hyrule Castle was amazing. If the Divine Beasts were replaced with slightly smaller castles, oh man, would this game shoot up in my eyes. Hyrule Castle was a mix of a traditional dungeon with the freedom that Breath of the Wild gives you. Each room had very rare and powerful items or weapons. There were bombable walls, secret passages, and mini-bosses, and even a few puzzles to solve. But the thing was that if you wanted to, you could just go straight to the boss. The dungeon was there to essentially give you one more power-up or punishment depending on your skill before the final fight. It took me a while before I even saw every room of that place because of how massive it was and how little you need to traverse in order to get to your destination. I hope in the future they adopt this style of having the dungeon, but giving you the option of how much you want to delve into it. The only negative of Hyrule Castle is how stupid the final boss is. Yes, I get that it's cinematic, but then give me a cutscene, not... Even with those issues, the game still feels and plays fantastic. Outside of rain, rain is stupid. I logged an easy 70 hours on my Get All Shrines file. The game was a bit of a letdown in some aspects, but surpassed others. Ultimately, it's a Zelda for those who don't want to play Zelda, while still entertaining regular fans. Climbing was surprisingly fun for something so simple. Scaling gigantic walls and stuff felt like a mini accomplishment on their own. Not to mention, so many games claim the whole, you see that, you can climb it, but don't deliver on it, so it's nice to actually have that. Which works out because, and I keep saying it, the freedom in this game allows you to travel anywhere you want first. Instead of traditional items, you get your main runes on the plateau, and you use those throughout the whole game. I kinda wish there was like a hookshot rune, or that I could use the magnet rune to pull myself towards stuff. But regardless, not locking them behind dungeons was brilliant, and was the same reason why I loved Link Between Worlds. I got to choose what to do first. Nothing is really locked behind anything after you clear the plateau. But the thing that stands out the most? Well, I guess it's a bunch of little things. The details. There are so many tiny details in this game that give it so much charm. Elemental weapons increasing or decreasing your temperature if equipped, enemies using smaller enemies as weapons or being distracted by bombs because they just want to play soccer. Stuff that even with the game's minimal handholding, you could potentially never find. When the game first came out, I had so much fun talking with my buddies about all these neat areas, tricks, and details we discovered. Nintendo did a great job at not just shoving it in our face and spoiling every single thing in one go. The game was severely lacking in side quests. There's only like 2 neat and memorable ones, the others are all just fetch quests. But considering you can go and beat the game whenever you want, it honestly didn't bother me too much since every quest was basically a side quest outside of porking the porker. Speaking of, the fact that you can bum rush straight to the final boss is fantastic. I have done so many attempts at beating this game in under an hour, which is very possible. As it stands, my record's like 1 hour and 15 minutes, which sucks. But regardless, it's a blast. For starters, the final boss isn't a pushover like he is if you actually do the story mode. And prior to fighting him, you need to fight all of the blights in a gauntlet. If you die to any of them or Ganon, back to the start for all of those fights. It's so much fun. Ultimately, I'd probably give Breath of the Wild a 9 out of 10 if I'm feeling generous. The game is not perfect, but it's a blast and definitely worth your money. Master Mode is garbage though, as the combat is not designed for damage sponges that regenerate health, but the Master Trials offer a fun design molded after one of the best Shrine Trials. I have hopes for the DLC, but knowing Nintendo, they won't deliver. One more comparison to my favorite, Majora's Mask. You basically figure that Majora's was DLC for Ocarina of Time in a sense, so to me, I feel like the DLC should be on a fraction of that level. Using the same engine, I want to see new stories, locales, items, and enemies. I don't want to go around the same map that you've made me traverse twice despite it being massive. But from some leaks, it looks like we're going for a post Breath of the Wild ending rather than a blast from the past. Who knows? Maybe we'll even get a little bit more salty when it's released. And that's it. This ends The Legend of Zelda with a side of salt. I gotta tell ya, it was fun playing through these games again and reminding myself of why the series was so special to me. Journeying through these lands again has helped me feel a bit more creative, and I've started flushing out some more of my OC. I know not everyone agreed with my opinions, but the thing is, I don't really care, and neither should you. There are opinions. I had fun with some of these games more than others, and I'm aware that various people can think differently. If you loved Twilight Princess, that's great. If you hated Skyward Sword, well, hot dog, that's fine too. Opinions help make us unique as people, just as so many parts of each Zelda game makes them their own. If you parrot yourself to others' opinions, you lose track of who you are. You become a ghost of your former self, and a shell of the person you admire. It's okay to be influenced, just as Zelda has influenced countless successful games throughout the years. You shouldn't be getting angry and threaten someone just for not thinking exactly the same way as you, or someone else. Strive to become your own person. Someone worthy of leaving behind a legend of their own.